I'm Elliot Bailey, 45 years old, and for the past 18 years, I've dedicated my career to TechSouth Solutions as a senior IT project manager. Over nearly 2 decades, I built my professional identity on reliability, precision, and an unwavering commitment to thorough documentation, qualities that earned me respect internally and externally. My work revolved around complex technology migrations and system integrations, the latest of which was an $8.5 million cloud migration project that I led from inception to completion. That project alone delivered a 30% cost reduction to my company's infrastructure expenses annually, a tangible achievement that not only saved millions, but also positioned TechSouth as a leader in cloud technology adoption. My role wasn't just about managing timelines and budgets. It involved architecting proprietary system frameworks, ensuring every piece of code, every interface, every data migration step was meticulously recorded. I have always been acutely aware that in IT, documentation isn't just about compliance, it's about continuity. Because of this, I maintained detailed project logs, backup copies of system architectures, and comprehensive email archives that captured every key decision and approval. These habits weren't born out of paranoia, but from experience. Over the years, I had seen how incomplete records could derail projects or leave teams vulnerable in audits or disputes. That morning, the day everything changed, I arrived at the office as usual. My routine was methodical. I reviewed the schedules for my team of 12 engineers, checked status updates on our ongoing projects, and prepared for a scheduled meeting with HR. I had no indication that what awaited me was anything but business as usual. When Jason Harper, the HR director, called me into his office, I expected a routine discussion. Instead, he handed me a termination letter. The words were clinical, citing corporate restructuring as the reason. No prior warning, no discussion about performance or alternatives. Not a hint that after 18 years, my position was being eliminated overnight. I recall reading the letter carefully, my mind registering every word with a detached clarity. Effective immediately, it said. There was no severance offer, no mention of the pension plan I had fully vested into after years of loyalty. It was a sudden severance, cold and impersonal. Jason awaited my response, perhaps expecting anger or confusion. Instead, I remained calm and professional. I looked him in the eye and said simply, "Understood." No outburst, no argument. I knew that losing my temper wouldn't help me. My experience had taught me that crises are best handled with a clear head and careful planning. Returning home that evening should have been a moment to process the shock and begin strategizing my next steps. Instead, it became the start of a personal unraveling. My wife, Laura, who I had always thought was my partner through thick and thin, looked at me with a coldness I didn't recognize before. She said, "You're worthless. I'm taking the kids." Those words landed with brutal finality. It wasn't just about the job loss anymore. It was a fracture in my family life, a betrayal that cut deeper than any professional setback. I was stunned, numb, unable to face the silence of our home or the harsh reality of her declaration. I left. I found myself wandering the streets late into the night before drifting into a small, nearly empty diner. The hum of fluorescent lights, the clatter of dishes, and the soft murmur of the few patrons became a strange comfort. I sat at the counter, staring into a black coffee, trying to piece together what to do next. I was overwhelmed, but still clinging to the part of me that believed there was a way forward. That's when an old man slid onto the stool beside me. He didn't say much at first, just studied my face, as if reading a story written in the lines of exhaustion and defeat. Then quietly, he said 5 words I'll never forget. "You look just like my boy." Those words sparked something unexpected, a flicker of hope, in a night I thought held none. I didn't yet understand how or why, but that moment felt like the beginning of a path I needed to take, a path defined not by despair, but by calculated resolve. Over the course of nearly 2 decades at TechSouth Solutions, I cultivated a career defined not only by longevity, but by consistent, measurable impact. When I look back at the projects I led, the numbers tell a story of sustained contribution. Collectively, these initiatives generated upwards of $25 million in revenue for the company. The crown jewel among them was the cloud migration I spearheaded just last year, a complex $8.5 million endeavor that fundamentally transformed Texas's infrastructure. The migration cut operational expenses by 30%, translating into roughly $2.5 million in annual savings. This wasn't just a vague estimate. It was the result of deliberate planning, budget forecasting, and methodical post-implementation audits that confirmed the cost efficiencies. My role extended well beyond the project manager's traditional scope. I was deeply involved in the proprietary system architecture, designing, documenting, and refining the frameworks that underpinned our entire technology stack. These systems weren't off-the-shelf solutions. They were custom-built platforms integrating multiple legacy systems with cloud services. Every interface, every middleware connection, every security protocol was meticulously documented in detailed architecture diagrams, version-controlled repositories, and exhaustive changelogs. This comprehensive documentation was essential, considering the scale of the teams involved and the criticality of the systems to core business operations. I managed a team of 12 engineers, each responsible for different modules of the technology ecosystem. My leadership style emphasized clear communication, accountability, and proactive risk management. Weekly status meetings, formalized milestone reports, and a shared documentation portal ensured that no piece of information was lost or misunderstood. In my experience, this level of transparency was the only way to sustain momentum in projects of such complexity, especially when multiple vendors and compliance requirements intersected. Over time, these practices built trust, not only within my team but across departments and with executive leadership. A substantial part of my approach hinged on maintaining comprehensive email archives and backup logs. I treated communication not as informal exchanges, but as official records. Every project approval, every change request, and every vendor negotiation was captured in written form. This practice paid dividends during compliance audits and vendor disputes, where the clarity and thoroughness of my documentation often tipped the scales in Texas's favor. It was a habit born from experience. Early in my career, I witnessed how gaps in record-keeping could lead to project delays, cost overruns, and legal vulnerabilities. I learned to anticipate the need for evidence, whether for performance reviews, intellectual property claims, or regulatory compliance. My compensation reflected the responsibilities and expertise I brought to the table. With multiple promotions over the years, my salary had reached above $148,000 annually, augmented by bonuses tied to project milestones and company performance. Equally important was my fully vested pension plan, a benefit I had accrued through consistent service and contributions, intended as a financial anchor for my long-term security. This pension was not just a number on paper. It represented years of commitment and stability, a promise from the company to honor loyalty and performance. That morning, I arrived at the office with these successes and safeguards in place, confident in the foundation I had built. My routine was methodical, reviewing project schedules, analyzing progress reports from my engineers, and preparing for the HR meeting that later proved to be anything but routine. I had no indication that this day would mark a professional rupture. Yet, all those years of documented achievements and system knowledge would soon collide with a reality that undervalued not just my contributions, but the carefully constructed frameworks I had put in place. Reflecting on those years now, it's clear how my professional diligence and strategic mindset, which had been my greatest assets, became the pillars upon which I would later rebuild. But at that moment, facing the unexpected termination letter, none of those accomplishments shielded me from the cold efficiency of corporate restructuring. What I didn't realize yet was how crucial every piece of documented evidence and every contractual clause would become in the battles ahead, both in the boardroom and beyond. Jason Harper was a man under pressure, a fact I learned quickly after my termination. The company's upper management had laid down strict cost-cutting mandates, demanding a 25% reduction in overheads within the IT department. For Jason, this translated into a ruthless calculus: replace highly paid, long-tenured employees like myself with cheaper contractors who could ostensibly do the job for less. I knew from the outset that this wasn't about performance. My record was spotless, my projects delivered on time and under budget. It was purely a financial decision driven by corporate bottom lines. From what I pieced together in the days following my dismissal, Jason had orchestrated a plan to hire an external contractor at roughly 40% of my salary. Considering my compensation topped $148,000 annually, this was a significant downgrade for the company in terms of expertise and institutional knowledge, but a tempting saving on immediate payroll expenses. What Jason didn't fully account for was the complexity of the systems I managed, the proprietary architecture that had evolved over nearly 2 decades, and the crucial role I played in system continuity. Jason's approach was swift and unapologetic. The termination letter I received was drafted hastily, notably absent of any severance offer or acknowledgement of my fully vested pension plan. According to my employment contract, severance and pension rights were protected under specific clauses, especially in cases of restructuring. But Jason chose to ignore these protections, presumably betting that I wouldn't contest the dismissal or that the legal costs would deter any challenge. This gross oversight would later become a critical leverage point in my strategy. Simultaneously, the personal front was collapsing. Laura, my wife, embittered by the sudden loss of our financial stability, was quick to seize what she could. Beyond verbal accusations and threats aimed at my self-worth, she moved to assert full custody of our children. More damaging was her financial maneuvering. I discovered that she had covertly transferred $118,000 from joint accounts into undisclosed personal funds. These concealed asset transfers violated marital financial disclosure agreements and pointed to a calculated attempt to destabilize my financial standing further. What both Jason and Laura failed to recognize was the extent of my preparedness. Over the years, my habit of detailed documentation wasn't limited to work projects. It extended to personal financial records and contractual agreements. I maintained comprehensive records of my employment contract, including clauses about severance, pension vesting, and non-compete stipulations tied to severance payments. I had exclusive access and control over system passwords, architecture diagrams, and operational protocols essential to the company's IT infrastructure. These were not arbitrary conveniences, but critical assets that made me indispensable for system continuity. Jason's failure to consider these facts was a critical oversight, one born perhaps from arrogance or underestimation. His expedited replacement plan overlooked the operational risk of abruptly removing the architect of the company's core systems without proper knowledge transfer or documentation handoff. I was the gatekeeper of system integrity, and any attempt to bypass me without adequate measures would inevitably lead to system instability, client dissatisfaction, and regulatory scrutiny. On Laura's side, her financial manipulations ignored the legal requirements of full asset disclosure during custody and divorce proceedings. She underestimated my ability to trace transactions and compile forensic evidence. The joint accounts, bank statements, and transfer records were all preserved, another testament to my methodical approach in managing not just work, but life's complexities. In the midst of this turmoil, the old man from the diner, Martin Caldwell, remained a faint but persistent presence in my mind. His quiet wisdom hinted that patience and strategic thinking were my allies. He sensed, perhaps more clearly than I did at the time, that beneath this dual assault lay vulnerabilities that could be exposed and exploited through systematic documentation and legal diligence. In essence, Jason Harper's cold corporate maneuvering and Laura's personal betrayal both revolved around the same critical mistake: underestimating the power of thorough documentation, contractual enforcement, and proprietary knowledge. Their attempts to sidestep financial and legal obligations were reckless gambits against a professional who had spent nearly 2 decades building airtight records and operational indispensability. This realization marked a turning point. Rather than succumbing to despair or anger, I began to see the outlines of a strategic response. They had made miscalculations that could be turned against them. The battle lines were drawn, not only for my career, but for my family and financial dignity. The cards were in my hands. It was time to play them with precision and resolve. After the shock of that morning's termination had settled into a dull ache, I set about carefully reviewing every document I'd been handed, or more accurately, withheld. The termination package was sparse, almost dismissive in its brevity. There was no severance offer, no mention of the pension plan I'd spent years contributing to and had fully vested in, and the release form was drafted with a haste that betrayed its purpose, to silence any potential disputes without offering anything substantial in return. I took the release form home and laid it out on my dining table under the harsh light of my desk lamp. The language was vague, overloaded with generic legal jargon, but strikingly thin on guarantees or compensation. It was clear that the company, or more precisely Jason Harper, had rushed this to prevent any prolonged negotiation. Yet, my experience with contracts allowed me to spot its critical gaps immediately, specifically how the severance clause was entirely ignored, and the pension rights that should have been protected under my fully vested plan were absent from any acknowledgement. Next, I turned my attention to my email archives, starting with all correspondence from Jason Harper in the weeks leading up to my termination. Meticulously, I pulled threads that revealed a pattern of intent to circumvent standard procedures. In one email chain between Harper and his senior management contacts, I found discussions about engaging a contractor at a fraction of my salary, 40% to be exact, and doing so without offering severance or honoring my pension obligations. The tone was clinical, almost callous, speaking of cost containment and minimal exposure rather than the people impacted. One particular email from Harper to the external recruiter read, "Ensure the contract is finalized before Elliott's termination date to avoid severance triggers." That sentence alone was a smoking gun. It laid bare a calculated effort to sidestep legal and company obligations. For someone who had always played by the book, this was not only unethical, it was a blatant breach of fiduciary duty. Simultaneously, I reviewed my personal financial records, which I had maintained just as diligently as my professional ones. The joint accounts Laura and I shared had recently been subject to multiple unexplained transfers. Tracing the transactions revealed she had concealed roughly $118,000 by moving funds into accounts I was unaware of. This wasn't a simple oversight or a result of shared expenses. It was a calculated effort to hide assets during what was clearly becoming a contentious custody and divorce battle. The stark contrast between my meticulously organized records and the hastily thrown together termination documents painted a disturbing picture. Both Jason and Laura had made the same fundamental error, underestimating the value of documentation. Where they had acted impulsively and without transparency, I had years of carefully recorded evidence to counter their narratives. I also took the opportunity to cross-reference system access logs against the termination timeline. As the senior architect and project manager, I was the sole custodian of many proprietary system passwords, architecture diagrams, and operational procedures. These weren't just files on a server. They formed the core of TechSys's operational continuity. Without my knowledge and cooperation, the company risked significant disruption. The system logs showed no formal knowledge transfer or proper handoff to the contractor Jason had brought in, confirming my suspicion that the transition was being rushed without adequate preparation. My internal monologue was clinical and precise as I pieced together these elements. They need me for system continuity. They violated their own policies. These mistakes are leverage points. Instead of feeling defeated, a methodical plan began to take shape in my mind. The absence of severance violated explicit clauses in my contract. The pension plan was fully vested and legally protected. Laura's hidden transfers constituted financial misconduct. The company's reliance on my proprietary knowledge, coupled with their failure to manage the transition properly, exposed them to operational and legal risk. This phase of discovery was critical. Not only did it provide the factual basis for my response, but it also reinforced a strategic mindset. I realized that my strength lay not in confrontation or emotional reaction, but in the rigor of documentation, the consistency of contractual enforcement, and the ability to methodically expose breaches of duty. The pieces were assembled. It was now a matter of using them systematically to reclaim control. At this juncture, the challenge was clear. Translate this mountain of evidence into actionable leverage. I needed to identify the most effective pressure points, severance rights, pension entitlements, system indispensability, and asset concealment, and prepare to engage both legal counsel and professional networks. The stakes were high, and the path forward demanded patience, precision, and an unwavering commitment to professional integrity. Though the situation remained precarious, and the personal betrayals cut deeply. The thoroughness of my documentation had illuminated a way forward, one grounded not in impulsivity, but in strategic, systematic justice. The groundwork was laid. The next steps would require careful execution. After consolidating all the documentation from my initial review, I knew the next critical step was to engage legal expertise. This wasn't a situation to be handled casually or alone. It required professionals well-versed in employment and family law, and more importantly, those with a reputation for strategic, results-driven counsel. I scheduled a consultation with Sarah Reynolds, an employment lawyer recommended by a trusted former colleague who had successfully navigated complex severance disputes. Sarah's firm specialized in labor law and had a track record of holding corporations accountable for breaches of contract and fiduciary duty. I approached the meeting with a detailed dossier in hand. Organized chronologically, the folder contained my original employment contract with all amendments, the termination letter, the hastily drafted release form, email correspondence between Jason Harper and recruitment agencies, and logs from the company's system access control. I also included printouts of project timelines and architecture diagrams that underscored my operational indispensability. Preparing this packet wasn't spontaneous. It was the result of methodical work over several sleepless nights, meticulously ensuring that every piece of evidence was legible, properly labeled and referenced. During our first consultation, Sarah impressed me with her calm, analytical approach. She listened intently as I laid out the facts and handed over my assembled documents. Her eyes scanned the pages quickly, but thoroughly. "This is more than a standard severance dispute," she said. "You have clear evidence of contractual violations and potentially unlawful termination tactics. The email chain alone reveals intent to circumvent your pension and severance rights. This could be leveraged decisively." I felt a surge of cautious optimism. Her expertise was exactly what I needed to transform frustration into actionable strategy. Simultaneously, I retained a family law attorney, Maria Gomez, to address the escalating personal conflict with Laura. Given the financial irregularities I uncovered, particularly the concealed $118,000 transferred from joint accounts, I knew this wasn't going to be a straightforward custody or divorce proceeding. Maria's experience in forensic financial investigations and asset recovery was critical. At our initial meeting, I provided bank statements, transfer records, and a timeline of disputed transactions. Her team's approach was systematic: trace every dollar, identify patterns of concealment, and prepare for discovery demands. This was a legal chess game, and I intended to play it with precision. To support both legal fronts, I developed a comprehensive organizational system for all my documents. Every contract clause, email, bank statement, and system diagram was catalogued digitally with secure backups on encrypted drives. I created a master spreadsheet indexing each document's relevance, date, source, and cross-referenced notes, outlining potential legal arguments tied to each piece of evidence. This level of organization wasn't just to keep my lawyers informed. I understood that courts and regulatory agencies respected clarity and professionalism. Disorganized or incomplete evidence would undermine my case. Recognizing the importance of corroboration, I reached out discreetly to trusted colleagues still within Texas. I requested written witness statements from a handful of senior engineers and project coordinators who could attest to my role in system architecture and the abruptness of my termination. Their testimonies highlighted the lack of a formal knowledge transfer plan and the risks posed by Harper's replacement strategy. These statements were carefully drafted to maintain professionalism and avoid inflammatory language, focusing strictly on factual observations and timelines. Moreover, I encrypted all proprietary system passwords and architecture diagrams in a secure, isolated digital vault, accessible only to myself and my legal counsel. This was critical. Not only did it safeguard my intellectual property, but it also reminded the company of their operational dependence on my exclusive knowledge. Retaining control over these assets was a strategic move. It was a quiet but potent form of leverage. The company could not proceed with its replacement plan without risking significant system disruption. Throughout this process, I reminded myself of the old man's words from that late night in the diner. "Patience wins. Build your case." That phrase became a mantra. I knew temptation to react emotionally, to respond with anger or rash decisions, would only jeopardize my position. Instead, I adopted a disciplined mindset of calculated patience, focusing on assembling irrefutable evidence, identifying contractual leverage points, and preparing to apply pressure methodically and professionally. One of the key legal insights Sarah provided was the interplay between the severance payments and the non-compete clause in my contract. The severance was explicitly tied to compliance with non-compete terms, which Harper's team had ignored, by terminating me abruptly without the agreed compensation. This meant the company risked triggering contractual penalties should I choose to enforce these provisions legally. This insight became central to our strategy. Pressuring Texas to honor severance would effectively enforce the non-compete, while securing financial benefits for me, a dual advantage. Adding to that, the system dependencies I managed, documented comprehensively through access logs and architecture diagrams, demonstrated that the company's unilateral decision to replace me jeopardized operational continuity. This technical evidence was a rare and powerful asset in employment disputes, turning what might be seen as a routine corporate layoff into a complex professional liability issue. My lawyers advised using this angle not just in negotiations, but potentially as grounds for a regulatory complaint or operational injunction if necessary. On the family law front, Maria's team began drafting demands for full financial disclosure from Laura, referencing the concealed transfers uncovered in the bank statements. The strategy was to expose the financial manipulations early and frame custody negotiations in a context of demonstrated bad faith. This approach was aligned with my goal to protect my children and secure a fair share of marital assets without protracted litigation. By the end of this phase, I had established a clear, multifaceted roadmap: legal action against Texas for breach of contract and fiduciary violations, regulatory complaints targeting pension and severance infractions, family court proceedings to address custody and asset concealment, and secured leverage through exclusive control of proprietary system knowledge. Each element was interlinked, designed to systematically apply pressure across professional and personal domains. Although the path ahead promised to be arduous, my preparation was thorough. The foundation laid by my careful documentation, strategic legal counsel, and disciplined mindset positioned me not as a victim, but as a professional ready to navigate the complexities of corporate and family law with precision. The next steps would demand patience and resolve, but now I was no longer alone or powerless. After gathering all my documentation and consulting initial legal perspectives, the critical next step was to formalize my case with expert counsel. I arranged a meeting with Sarah Reynolds, a labor and employment attorney known for her precise, results-driven approach. During our first session, I presented a thoroughly organized dossier: my original employment contract with all amendments, the termination letter, the hastily composed release form, detailed email chains revealing HR's deliberate attempts to circumvent severance and pension obligations, and comprehensive system access logs and architecture diagrams underscoring my operational indispensability. Sarah's methodical review confirmed my suspicions. Texas had violated multiple contractual provisions. Most glaring was the omission of severance pay, explicitly guaranteed under a clause triggered by involuntary termination without cause or restructuring. The release form, designed to preclude my future claims, was legally insufficient since it was presented without the promised compensation, rendering it potentially void. Furthermore, the company had ignored the non-negotiable pension vesting rights I had accrued over 18 years, a breach exposing them to regulatory scrutiny and fiduciary liability. Beyond contractual breaches, Sarah identified that the deliberate emails from Jason Harper and senior management disclosed intent to evade these obligations, constituting bad faith and possible violations under labor laws governing fair termination practices. The correspondence revealed a calculated strategy to onboard a cheaper contractor before my official termination date, precisely to sidestep severance triggers. This intentional timing was a legal vulnerability we planned to exploit. On the technical front, my documentation of system architecture and access control provided foundational evidence of my unique role in maintaining critical infrastructure. The architecture diagrams I had meticulously updated over the years showed numerous proprietary modules and integrations, for which I held exclusive password credentials and operational protocols. Logs confirmed no official knowledge transfer or onboarding occurred for Harper's replacement, corroborating the company's disregard for operational continuity and risk management. Sarah noted that this demonstrated breach of fiduciary duty and operational negligence might amplify claims beyond severance, possibly including damages for business disruption. Parallel to employment law, I engaged Maria Gomez, a family law attorney with expertise in forensic financial investigations. Maria's thorough review of bank statements uncovered a troubling pattern. Laura had covertly transferred $118,000 from joint marital accounts into accounts inaccessible to me. This deliberate concealment violated disclosure obligations during marital dissolution and threatened my financial security further. Maria's team began preparing discovery requests aimed at uncovering additional undisclosed assets and establishing a timeline of transfers, forming a robust basis to challenge Laura's asset claims and custody petitions. Understanding the importance of presenting a professional, airtight case, I created an exhaustive organizational system. Each document, email, and financial record was catalogued with metadata, dates, relevance, and cross-references to contractual clauses or legal arguments. Digital copies were encrypted and securely backed up, ensuring accessibility and integrity. I also solicited written witness statements from 5 senior colleagues still employed at Texas, who could attest to my specialized knowledge, the abruptness of my dismissal, and the lack of formal transition protocols. Their statements avoided personal judgments, focusing strictly on factual observations, lending credibility and neutrality to the case. A critical strategic insight Sarah provided was the linkage between the severance payments and the non-compete clause in my contract. The agreement stipulated that severance was contingent on compliance with non-compete terms, which Harper's team violated by terminating me abruptly and withholding severance. This meant that Texas could be held liable for contractual penalties if I enforced these provisions. We plan to leverage this by demanding full severance to uphold the non-compete, effectively creating a dual pressure point benefiting my financial and professional interests. Moreover, the company's failure to facilitate a proper knowledge transfer constituted a dereliction of fiduciary duty, exposing them not only to breach of contract claims, but also potential operational damages. Sarah advised that such technical evidence, system logs, password custody, and architecture diagrams was rare and powerful in employment disputes, transforming my termination from a routine layoff into a complex breach with tangible business consequences. On the family front, Maria's team prepared to file motions requesting full financial disclosure from Laura, emphasizing the necessity of transparency given the concealed transfers. This approach aimed to undermine Laura's custody claims by demonstrating financial bad faith and to secure equitable distribution of marital assets. The forensic financial analysis was ongoing, with every suspicious transaction meticulously traced and documented. Throughout this intense preparation phase, I remained disciplined, guided by the old man's counsel. Patience wins. Build your case. Emotional reactions were set aside in favor of systematic evidence gathering and professional collaboration. The goal was clear: transform betrayal and loss into a structured, legally grounded response that would hold all parties accountable. By the end of this phase, I had assembled a comprehensive, multi-pronged legal strategy. Employment claims exposing contractual and fiduciary breaches, regulatory complaints targeting pension and severance violations, family court actions addressing asset concealment and custody disputes, and professional leverage maintained through exclusive control of proprietary systems. Each element was interdependent, designed to apply calibrated pressure across both corporate and personal arenas. The complexity and scope of this approach required meticulous execution, but my preparation and legal team provided a formidable foundation. I was no longer a passive victim, but a professional poised to reclaim control through calculated, evidence-based action. The path ahead was challenging, yet the strategic groundwork was firmly in place. Once my legal strategy was solidified with Sarah Reynolds and Maria Gomez, I moved deliberately to execute the next phase, formalizing my claims and initiating systemic pressure on both Texas Solutions and Laura. The first concrete step was serving legal notices to Texas, an action carefully coordinated with Sarah to ensure every procedural detail was airtight. The notices cited explicit contract violations, failure to provide severance pay as stipulated, disregard for my fully vested pension rights, and breach of fiduciary duty by neglecting proper knowledge transfer protocols. We included documented evidence, excerpts from the employment contract, email correspondences exposing intent to circumvent legal obligations, and detailed system architecture logs underscoring my indispensability. Simultaneously, I prepared and filed complaints with the State Labor Board. This administrative angle was critical. It signaled that the issue was not just a private contractual dispute, but also potentially a violation of labor regulations. The complaint outlined Texas's failure to honor severance terms and the pension plan protections guaranteed under state and federal law. Sarah emphasized that regulatory bodies wield the power to impose substantial fines and compel corrective action, leverage beyond what contested civil litigation alone could achieve. To ensure the pension violations received appropriate scrutiny, we alerted the Department of Labor's Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation, PBGC, which oversees private pension plans. Given my fully vested status, any attempt by Texas to withhold or diminish those benefits constituted a serious regulatory breach. The PBGC's involvement layered additional pressure on the company, making clear that ignoring pension obligations risked triggering costly investigations and penalties. Alongside these formal filings, I maintained a professional but firm communication line with Texas's legal representatives. Every email I sent was carefully worded, clear, concise, factual, and free from emotional language, to preserve an image of professionalism and reinforce my position as a knowledgeable stakeholder. I requested official acknowledgement of receipt for all notices and copies of any internal documents related to my termination and severance policies, signaling readiness to escalate if necessary. On the operational front, I took the strategic step of notifying key clients about potential system risks arising from the abrupt personnel changes. This was done discreetly through formal, factual communications, emphasizing the importance of stable IT infrastructure and continuity. I pointed out that the company's failure to conduct a proper knowledge transfer and the rushed onboarding of a lesser experienced contractor introduced uncertainties that could impact service levels. This not only forecasted potential reputational risks for Texas, but subtly reminded clients that my expertise was integral to system stability. Concurrently, to secure my financial footing amid the turbulence, I negotiated and secured a consulting contract with a competing firm. The engagement came with a 20% pay increase over my previous salary, an acknowledgement of my specialized skills and industry reputation. Signing this contract was a calculated move, giving me immediate income and additional leverage. It demonstrated my market value and reduced dependency on Texas, reinforcing my position in ongoing negotiations. Throughout this period, I maintained a disciplined approach to all company inquiries and Laura's legal counsel. My responses were measured and professional, never revealing the extent of the mounting legal pressure or the breadth of evidence amassed. This restraint was deliberate. I avoided provoking defensive or retaliatory reactions that might complicate or prolong the dispute. Instead, I positioned myself as a calm, resolute professional whose actions were guided strictly by documented facts and contractual rights. Behind the scenes, I continued to refine and expand my evidence repository. Every piece of correspondence, every document received or sent was indexed and backed up securely. I anticipated that this phase might trigger countermoves from Texas or Laura, so I prepared for all eventualities, ready to escalate complaints or seek injunctions if the company attempted to interfere with system access, or if Laura intensified asset concealment efforts. In retrospect, this phase was about establishing a multi-front, systematic pressure campaign. The combination of legal notices, regulatory complaints, client advisories, and personal financial stabilization created interlocking leverage points. Texas was now confronted not only with legal exposure, but also operational and reputational risks. Laura faced increasing scrutiny through legal channels, addressing financial misconduct, and I stood firm, supported by a professional network and legal counsel, committed to seeing the matter through methodically. Yet despite these advances, the situation remained professionally and personally precarious. Texas had yet to respond substantively. The Labor Board's investigation was in early stages. Laura's next moves were uncertain, and the emotional toll of prolonged conflict lingered. The battle lines were drawn, but the outcome was far from settled. My focus was unshaken, patiently building the case, applying pressure where it counted, and preparing for the inevitable next phase of this strategic confrontation. Within just a few weeks of my formal actions, the consequences of Texas's hasty decision to sever my employment without proper transition began to ripple through the company's operations. The proprietary systems I had painstakingly architected and managed were not easily handed off, and the absence of a carefully planned knowledge transfer became glaringly apparent. System outages started occurring intermittently, at first minor, but increasingly disruptive. Internal incident reports logged recurring failures in key service nodes tied directly to the cloud migration infrastructure I had designed. The company's IT support teams, unfamiliar with the nuanced system interdependencies, struggled to diagnose and resolve these issues efficiently. Clients who depended on these platforms began voicing concerns. I received indirect reports from former colleagues that several major accounts were escalating complaints about delays and unexpected downtime. One client, a prominent financial services firm, threatened to withhold payments pending resolution of service-level agreement, SLA, breaches. These disturbances not only jeopardized Texas's reputation, but also risked contract penalties that could balloon into multi-million-dollar losses. The operational risks that Jason Harper had seemingly dismissed now landed squarely on the company's doorstep. Meanwhile, regulatory agencies took notice. The State Labor Board acknowledged receipt of my complaint and promptly initiated a formal inquiry into Texas's compliance with severance and pension laws. This was not an automatic process. Such investigations require preliminary evidence and credible claims before regulators mobilize resources. The fact that they moved swiftly suggested that my documentation, from the employment contract excerpts to the email correspondence exposing Harper's intent, was compelling. The Labor Board requested detailed records from Texas regarding termination procedures, severance policies, and pension contributions related to my case. The Department of Labor's Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation, PBGC, also opened a parallel inquiry, focusing on whether Texas had violated pension vesting rules. Given my fully vested status after 18 years, any attempt to withhold or alter my pension benefits was a serious breach of federal regulations. PBGC's involvement introduced the risk of significant fines, regulatory sanctions, and mandated corrective actions that could have long-term financial and reputational repercussions for the company. Within Texas, Harper's replacement, an external contractor brought in at a fraction of my salary, struggled to meet operational demands. Lacking institutional knowledge and access to proprietary system documentation, the contractor's onboarding was rushed and incomplete. Internal communications leaked to me through discreet contacts described mounting frustrations on the engineering floor. Several engineers submitted formal complaints about the contractor's inability to troubleshoot recurring outages effectively, highlighting the absence of a structured knowledge transfer. Jason Harper, sensing the escalating risk, began to make desperate overtures. He reached out to me multiple times via email and phone, offering to negotiate consulting fees to smooth over the transition and prevent further disruptions. His tone was noticeably conciliatory, a stark contrast to the cold dismissal of weeks before. I forwarded all such communications to my attorney without responding directly, preserving a professional but firm posture while building a record of his attempts to mitigate liability. This exchange further evidenced the company's acknowledgement of operational dependency on my expertise. On the personal front, Laura's position began to weaken under the increasing scrutiny of family court. The forensic accountants commissioned by my attorney uncovered additional discrepancies beyond the initial $118,000 in undisclosed transfers, several smaller transactions that collectively suggested a pattern of financial concealment. These findings bolstered my legal team's argument that Laura was acting in bad faith during custody and asset negotiations. The court's growing skepticism translated into more favorable interim rulings for me regarding custody arrangements and asset freezes. Despite this mounting pressure on both fronts, I maintained a measured professional demeanor. Every interaction with Texas representatives or Laura's legal counsel was carefully calibrated to avoid provoking reactive measures that might complicate the situation or provide grounds for counterclaims. Instead, I focused on reinforcing my position through consistent documentation updates, timely legal filings, and strategic communications. I continued to secure and archive all incoming correspondence, ensuring that no detail escaped the growing evidence repository. The interplay of operational failures at Texas, regulatory investigations, and family court revelations created a turning tide. The company's attempts to sidestep contractual and fiduciary obligations were no longer cloaked behind corporate bureaucracy. They were exposed to public and legal scrutiny. Meanwhile, Laura's strategy to isolate financial resources and undermine my parental rights faced procedural setbacks backed by forensic evidence. Yet the battle was far from concluded. Texas had not offered any formal remediation, labor inquiries remained in progress, and family court hearings were scheduled but unresolved. The contractor's struggles underscored the ongoing risk of system failures that could erode client trust further. The professional and personal crises intertwined, each reinforcing the urgency and complexity of my response. In this precarious balance, I recognized the importance of maintaining discipline and patience. The momentum was shifting but only systematic. Sustained pressure would dismantle the defenses of Texas and Laura fully. My role evolved from reactive victim to strategic orchestrator, leveraging precise evidence, legal counsel, and professional integrity to construct a comprehensive web of accountability. The weeks following my initial filings marked a critical phase of escalation. The operational consequences of my absence, regulatory scrutiny, and family court developments converged into a multifaceted challenge. It was a reminder that professional competence and meticulous preparation are not just abstract virtues, but vital tools in navigating and ultimately overcoming complex betrayals on multiple fronts. The moment we filed the lawsuit against Texas Solutions, it felt like a pivotal escalation, yet I understood this was just another phase in a prolonged, strategic effort. Sarah Reynolds meticulously crafted our complaint to highlight not only the breach of contract, but also the breach of fiduciary duty. We framed the case around the company's willful disregard for explicit contractual severance clauses, pension obligations, and, critically, their failure to manage the transition process responsibly. Actions that jeopardized both my professional standing and the company's operational stability. The filing was comprehensive. We attached detailed exhibits, my original employment contract, annotated to show the severance and non-compete provisions, the termination letter lacking any severance offer, email threads exposing Jason Harper's deliberate plan to avoid pension liabilities, and system architecture diagrams paired with access logs to prove the company's reliance on my proprietary knowledge. The documentation was so precise that it left little room for Texas's legal team to argue ignorance or oversight. Sarah emphasized that this level of evidence created a strong foundation, not only for civil court but also for regulatory bodies to take action. Simultaneously, the Department of Labor responded quickly to our complaints. Their investigators requested extensive records from Texas, focusing on the pension fund's handling and severance payment policies. We provided the correspondence from Harper that made clear the company's intent to bypass legal obligations, which heightened the investigation's urgency. The Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation, PBGC, joined the inquiry, signaling that Texas risked facing significant fines if found in violation of pension rules. These regulatory pressures added a layer of leverage that went beyond the courtroom, threatening the company's financial health and reputation. While the lawsuit and regulatory processes unfolded, my family attorney, Maria Gomez, pushed aggressively in family court. The forensic accounting reports uncovered further irregularities in Laura's financial disclosures. Beyond the initial $118,000 in concealed transfers, smaller but systematic diversions came to light, undeniable evidence of bad faith during the divorce and custody proceedings. Maria's motions for asset freezes and enhanced discovery requests gained traction gradually undermining Laura's position. The judge's interim rulings began to favor me, granting increased custodial time and placing restrictions on Laura's access to disputed assets. Parallel to these developments, we noticed the business ramifications intensifying. Clients of Texas, once quietly concerned, began terminating or withholding contracts due to ongoing service disruptions tied to Harper's rushed replacement strategy. Internal complaints from engineers about the contractor's inadequate understanding of system intricacies circulated upward, creating internal friction and eroding confidence in Harper's leadership. I received indirect reports through trusted contacts that senior management was grappling with escalating operational risk, a direct consequence of their failure to manage my departure professionally. Jason Harper's response was telling. He initiated several settlement overtures, including offers to reinstate me on consulting terms and proposals to negotiate financial compensation. All his communications were forwarded directly to Sarah, without response from my side. This silence was intentional. We were building a documented record of his attempts to mitigate exposure, which could later be used to demonstrate acknowledgement of liability. Maintaining professional detachment here was essential. Any premature concessions or emotional responses could weaken our position. Throughout this period, I continued to update and refine our evidence repository. Each piece of correspondence, every new forensic report and system audit was catalogued and secured with meticulous indexing. I also coordinated with the colleagues who had provided witness statements, ensuring their testimonies remained consistent and ready for depositions if required. This systematic approach kept our legal team prepared for any procedural developments or challenges that might arise. Despite the mounting pressure, the situation remained volatile. Texas had yet to offer a substantive public response or corrective measures. The regulatory investigations were ongoing, and family court proceedings were scheduled but far from concluded. The contractor's inability to stabilize the system compounded the company's operational risk, potentially fueling further client departures and internal dissent. Meanwhile, Laura's legal team was regrouping, likely preparing counter-arguments to the new financial evidence. The multi-front nature of these battles underscored the complexity of the situation. Professional, legal and personal challenges intertwined in a way that demanded unwavering focus and strategic patience. I was no longer a passive party, but an active orchestrator, leveraging every documented fact and legal avenue to dismantle the defenses of those who had underestimated me. The tide was shifting, but the ultimate resolution required continued perseverance, careful calibration of legal maneuvers, and steadfast professionalism. At this moment, the stakes could not have been higher, but so was my resolve. The groundwork laid in comprehensive documentation and legal strategy was bearing fruit, creating pressure that extended beyond the courtroom into regulatory agencies, client relationships, and family court. The coordinated pressures were forcing the antagonists to confront the consequences of their actions, yet the outcome remained uncertain, demanding continued vigilance and methodical execution. The unraveling of Jason Harper's tenure at Texas began quietly but swiftly. Within weeks of the regulatory inquiries and mounting client dissatisfaction becoming public, internal investigations exposed his role in orchestrating the unlawful termination and cost-cutting measures that disregarded contractual obligations and operational risks. The company's board convened emergency sessions, and the evidence compiled by my legal team, particularly the documented email chains revealing Harper's intent to bypass severance and pension responsibilities, became incontrovertible proof of misconduct. Facing mounting pressure, Texas terminated Harper's employment to contain the escalating scandal and signal accountability. This leadership shakeup was just the beginning of a larger fallout. Regulatory agencies, including the State Labor Board and the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation, completed their preliminary reviews and levied a $1.2 million fine against Texas for violations related to severance pay and pension fund mismanagement. These penalties reflected not only the financial harm caused to me personally, but also the broader breaches of fiduciary duty and labor law. The fine underscored the severity of the company's failures, sending a strong message internally and externally about the consequences of neglecting employee rights and legal standards. The operational consequences during this period were severe. and measurable. Clients, alarmed by ongoing system outages and instability emerging from the botched personnel transition, began reassessing their contracts. I received credible reports from trusted industry contacts that several key accounts, some representing millions in annual revenue, had either withheld payments or formally initiated contract termination proceedings. The cumulative client losses exceeded $3 million, a blow that significantly impacted Texas's financial stability and market reputation. Stock market reaction mirrored these troubles. News of regulatory fines, leadership failures, and client attrition triggered a rapid decline in investor confidence. Within days, Texas's stock price dropped by 15%, erasing substantial shareholder value and increasing pressure from investors demanding swift corrective action. Corporate governance committees intensified their scrutiny of past decisions, focusing particularly on Harper's role and the absence of proper oversight mechanisms to prevent such reckless cost-cutting strategies. Meanwhile, Laura's legal position in family court continued to deteriorate under the weight of forensic accounting evidence. Additional undisclosed financial transfers surfaced, further substantiating claims of asset concealment. The court granted interim rulings favoring me. I was awarded increased custodial rights and a freeze on contested marital assets, effectively limiting Laura's access to funds while the case progressed. These rulings reflected the court's growing skepticism of her credibility and financial disclosures. The cumulative effect of these legal, regulatory, and operational developments was a profound professional and personal shift. Texas was forced into a defensive posture, scrambling to stabilize its systems, reassure clients, and manage public relations challenges. Harper's dismissal was a symbolic and practical acknowledgement of the failures that had culminated in the crisis. But the company's challenges persisted as it sought to repair damaged client relationships and restore internal morale. Throughout this period, I maintained a disciplined, methodical approach. All communications with Texas legal representatives remained professional and precise, avoiding any emotional or reactive language that could undermine my position. I continued to document every interaction and development meticulously, ensuring my legal team had the most current evidence to support ongoing litigation and regulatory processes. At the same time, I focused on solidifying my financial and professional footing. With the consulting contract at a competing firm fully operational, I leveraged the increased income to manage mounting legal expenses and personal obligations. I also began engaging selectively with industry networks to rebuild and expand my professional reputation, emphasizing integrity and expertise in system architecture and project leadership. The weeks following Harper's termination underscored the strategic value of patience, preparation, and comprehensive documentation. Each layer of pressure, from regulatory fines to client losses, leadership changes, and family court decisions, interlocked to dismantle the defenses erected by those who had underestimated the consequences of their actions. Yet, even as the situation tilted towards justice and recovery, I remained acutely aware that the path ahead required continued vigilance, strategic execution, and professional composure to convert this turning tide into lasting resolution. The court rulings marked significant milestones in my long, methodical effort to reclaim what was rightfully mine, though the process was far from a simple victory. After months of legal wrangling, the civil court awarded me $325,000 in back pay, a figure that represented not only the salary I lost after being abruptly terminated, but also compensation for the benefits and bonuses withheld by Texas Solutions in violation of our contract. This amount was carefully calculated based on detailed payroll records, bonus structures, and the company's performance metrics during my final years there. The court's decision validated the contractual severance clauses I had painstakingly documented and highlighted the company's failure to honor those obligations. Equally important was the recovery of $118,000 in concealed marital assets. The family court's forensic accounting experts had meticulously traced the transfers Laura attempted to hide, sifting through bank statements, wire transfers, and third-party accounts. Their reports, submitted as evidence, demonstrated a clear pattern of financial concealment designed to deny me my equitable share. The court's ruling to award me this sum was a direct consequence of the exhaustive documentation and financial records I had maintained, and my attorney's relentless pursuit of forensic transparency. This recovery not only restored substantial financial stability, but also set a precedent for full transparency in the ongoing custody and asset division proceedings. The emotional distress damages added another critical dimension to the judgment. $200,000 was awarded for the psychological and emotional toll exacted by Laura's betrayal and the sudden upheaval in both my professional and personal life. While such awards are often difficult to quantify, the court accepted expert psychological assessments and testimony outlining the profound impact of the abrupt job loss, family breakdown, and intentional financial sabotage. This recognition, though intangible, was an essential acknowledgement that the damage extended beyond numbers. It affected my well-being, reputation, and family dynamics. From a regulatory standpoint, the fines levied against Texas Solutions were severe and indicative of systemic failures. The State Labor Board imposed a $1.2 million penalty for multiple violations, failure to provide severance pay as required by law, mismanagement of pension funds, and breach of fiduciary duties related to employee termination. These fines were the culmination of a thorough investigation that drew upon the detailed evidence my legal team had compiled, including internal emails, contract clauses, and testimony from other employees who corroborated the systematic nature of these violations. The regulatory agencies made it clear that such breaches would not be tolerated, and the financial sanctions sent a message reverberating through the industry. Jason Harper's downfall was swift once the corporate board confronted the evidence. His role in orchestrating the illegal termination, evading severance payments, and endangering system stability was laid bare. After internal inquiries and mounting external pressure, he was terminated from his position, effectively blacklisting him within the tech community. His reputation, once solid among peers, was irreparably damaged. News of his dismissal circulated quietly but firmly, serving as a cautionary tale for managers who prioritize short-term savings over contractual and ethical responsibilities. The client fallout was another critical blow to Texas. Several key accounts, alarmed by the ongoing service disruptions and public legal controversies, opted to terminate contracts or withhold payments. Reports from industry contacts indicated that lost revenue surpassed $3 million, a figure that reflected both immediate contractual penalties and longer-term reputational damage. These client departures accelerated internal turmoil within Texas, intensifying pressure on management and precipitating urgent discussions on corporate restructuring to stabilize operations and restore trust. The company's stock market performance mirrored these internal shocks. Within days of the public announcements relating to regulatory fines and leadership shakeups, Texas's share price dropped by 15%, erasing significant shareholder value. Investor confidence waned, and analysts downgraded the company's outlook, citing governance failures and operational risks exposed by the scandal. This financial turbulence underscored the tangible consequences of ignoring employee rights and contractual obligations, not just for those directly involved, but for the company's broader fiscal health. On the family front, the court's rulings extended beyond asset recovery. Due to the documented concealment of assets and Laura's demonstrated financial bad faith, the judge awarded me primary custody of our children, along with 60% of the marital assets. This decision reflected a comprehensive evaluation of the evidence presented, including forensic reports and testimony from custody evaluators. The court emphasized the importance of stability and transparency, recognizing that Laura's actions undermined both. This outcome was particularly meaningful, as it restored a measure of control and protection over my family's future. Additional revelations surfaced as other Texas employees came forward, emboldened by my case, alleging wrongful terminations and similar cost-cutting abuses under Harper's leadership. These testimonies were incorporated into broader investigations and legal actions, compounding the company's liability and drawing attention to systemic corporate governance issues. My documented approach and willingness to expose these patterns helped galvanize a more extensive movement towards accountability within the company and the industry. Over the course of these proceedings, Legal fees and judgments mounted against the antagonists, but my reputation remained intact and even strengthened. Colleagues and industry leaders took note of my composed, evidence-based approach in confronting both professional and personal betrayals. My steadfast commitment to thorough documentation, legal rigor, and professional integrity became a reference point in conversations about best practices for employee rights and corporate governance. This recognition further enhanced my credibility and positioned me for future opportunities. In sum, the court rulings and associated regulatory actions represented the convergence of patient, systematic justice built on irrefutable evidence and strategic legal response. The financial recoveries, legal penalties, and custody arrangements were milestones, not endpoints, in a complex, ongoing process of professional and personal restoration. The outcomes underscored the vital importance of maintaining meticulous records, understanding contractual rights, and engaging expert counsel. Though much work remained ahead, these judgments established a foundation of accountability for those who underestimated the power of documented competence and legal perseverance. Today I find myself leading a talented team at FinTech Innovations, a position that not only represents a significant professional upgrade, but also offers a lifestyle balance I had long hoped for. My current role comes with a 25% salary increase compared to my previous position at Texas Solutions, a reflection of the value industry leaders place on extensive expertise in complex system architecture and project management. Beyond the paycheck, I now hold equity options in the company, aligning my interests directly with the firm's success and providing a longer-term financial stake that was absent in my prior corporate environment. Flexible working hours have further enhanced my quality of life, allowing me to dedicate meaningful time to family and personal pursuits without compromising professional responsibilities. My consulting practice has flourished alongside this new leadership role. Leveraging the deep system knowledge and operational insights I built over nearly 2 decades, I provide strategic advice and hands-on guidance to several clients navigating intricate cloud migration projects and digital transformation initiatives. This consulting work is not just a supplemental income source. It has become a vital extension of my professional brand, positioning me as a trusted expert who delivers tangible value through precision, documentation, and risk mitigation. Each engagement is underpinned by the lessons learned during my ordeal, especially the importance of maintaining exhaustive project records, clear contractual terms, and meticulous communication streams. These best practices have become the cornerstone of my advisory methodology. Reflecting on the turbulent months that preceded this resurgence, I appreciate the critical role of calm professionalism and strategic patience. The old man's 5 words, "You look just like my boy," echo in my mind as a reminder that wisdom often arrives unexpectedly and resilience is forged through quiet determination rather than impulsive reaction. That night in the diner was a catalyst, nudging me toward a methodical approach during a time when chaos threatened to overwhelm. Instead of yielding to despair, I channeled my energies into systematic documentation, legal consultation, and strategic leverage, disciplines that transformed personal and professional devastation into a foundation for recovery. The comprehensive documentation I maintained, contracts, emails, system diagrams, financial records, proved to be more than just archives. They became weapons of accountability and tools for enforcing my rights. These records enabled my legal team to expose corporate breaches of fiduciary duty and contractual violations, as well as to challenge financial misconduct in the family court arena. The detailed architecture diagrams and system access logs underscored my indispensable role in operations, compelling the company to reconsider its negligent termination practices. Similarly, clear financial trails unraveled attempts to conceal marital assets, safeguarding my family's financial future. Throughout the process, I maintained a professional demeanor, communicating with all parties in a measured, factual manner devoid of emotional pitfalls. This discipline not only strengthened my legal position, but also preserved my reputation within the industry. It became clear that mastery of one's documentation and contractual knowledge is a form of professional armor, safeguarding against the unpredictable variables of corporate and personal betrayal. Today, I'm grateful not only for the material recoveries, my full pension, severance, back pay and recovered assets, but also for the intangible victories, restored custody of my children, and a renewed sense of control over my life and career. The difficult lessons endured have reshaped my understanding of justice. It is not a sudden verdict, but a gradual, systematic process that rewards preparation, patience, and unwavering professionalism. Looking ahead, I continue to apply these principles in every project and engagement. I mentor younger professionals on the critical importance of thorough documentation, contractual clarity, and strategic patience. My experience has become a case study in resilience through competence, a narrative I share candidly to empower others facing similar challenges. The industry has taken note. My reputation for integrity and precision has opened doors that were once closed. In essence, what began as a night of loss transformed into a journey of renewal. The old man's simple, profound words served as a beacon, guiding me through the darkest hours toward a future shaped not by bitterness, but by systematic justice and professional excellence. This ongoing journey reinforces a fundamental truth. In the face of adversity, calm strategy and meticulous preparation are the most powerful tools one can wield.